We're going to talk about the midpoint formula now. The midpoint formula is a formula to calculate the point that is in the center of the segment, splitting the segment into two congruent segments. And the way to find it, this is my favorite formula, really, it's just averaging. We have 2 points, they have 2 x values. We have 2 points that have 2 y values, and we're really finding that average of each value to find the center. And I drew an image here just to kind of give you the idea of how this works, to sort of look at your 2 points in terms of their coordinates, which we do not know what they are right now. So one of the points we're going to call x1 and y1, and the other we will call x2 and y2, because we don't have a value for them right now. Of course, when we use the formula, we're going to have values for the points. We're going to be plugging into the formula and getting an answer. Right now, we are creating the formula. So we're kind of looking at what that comes from. So if we look at the left side of this rectangle and the right side of this rectangle, what those are to help us represent is the fact that these are using the x values. So we have x1 and x2, and so that is giving us the distance between them. So we want to find the distance right in the middle of them. What we would do is average those numbers. So we would do x1 plus x2 and divide by 2, and that would give us that central location. And so that center location is going to represent where on the line the x value is going to be for the center. Now we're going to look at the bottom and top of the rectangle. So we've got the bottom of it here, we've got the top of it here, just kind of looking on the axes. Here we've got our y-axis, we've got our y1 and our y2, and if we want to find the value that is right between them, then we would add them together and divide by 2. That finds that middle space there, and if we were to take that along over onto our rectangle here, the center y value and the center x value will give us that midpoint of the segment. And so the midpoint formula is kind of weird because it looks like a point. A point has an x value and a y value. And so the x value for that point is the average of the x's to find that middle spot. And the y portion of the equation is the average of the y's to find that middle y value. And so that is what will give you the midpoint. So that's our formula. You can put that formula over here in the box so you can see it for later. But keep in mind that this formula is given, there's like 2 parts to it. You would work them separately, and then when you're done, you would write your answer as a point, which would be one value in parentheses there, comma, and then the other value. And it looks so weird because it is showing you how the point would be written, and it's a formula. So it looks kind of crazy, but it's just averaging. So we're going to do some sample problems here. We're going to start by finding the midpoint of segment AB, or segment AB. Before I find the midpoint of it, I will need to know what the coordinates are for A and B. A is at -2, 3, and B is at 2, 5. So if I want to find the midpoint for these, I would take my x's and I would add them together and divide by 2. And so here, -2 plus +2 divided by 2 is going to give me numerator to be 0. 0 divided by 2 is 0. And then for the y's, we are going to look at the y values, which is a 3 and a 5. We're going to average those. So that's going to give me 8 divided by 2, which is 4. And so the midpoint, we have the x value and we have the y value, and we write it as a coordinate. So we've got 0, 4. That is the midpoint of AB. And that's how you use the midpoint formula in a normal sense. We're going to see one in a minute that is like backwards, but I'm going to work that a different way. So what is the midpoint for BC? So here's BC. Highlight that in a different color. So looking at BC, we already know point B, but we don't have point C yet. It is at 5, 1. So we're going to find the midpoint between the points 2, 5 and the point 5, 1. To calculate the midpoint, we're going to average our x's. So we've got a 2 and a 5. 2 and 5 divided by 2. This will give me my x value. And in geometry, we prefer fractions to decimals. So this number, the numerator is going to be a 7. 7 divided by 2 would give me a decimal. I'm going to write it as 7 over 2. You could write it as 3.5 if you want to write a mixed number. And for the y, we have a 5 and a 1. So we're going to have 5 plus 1 divided by 2, which is 6 divided by 2 is 3. So we have our x and our y now, and we will write the point as 7 over 2, comma 3. And that is the midpoint for that one. So it's just averaging. Try not to overthink it. It's my favorite because it's so easy. Just, add, divide by 2, add, divide by 2, write it as a point. This one here is a different sort of question, and there's like 3 ways to do this problem. So I'm going to try to show you so that you have options. So we have given z at -2, 4 and a at -7, 6. And they said that a is the midpoint of ZP. So it says given z and a, the midpoint of ZP. So we're so creative. It spells zap. But the key here, you want to make sure you know if they are giving you a point like this when they say the midpoint, that is the midpoint. It's not your end point. We are not going to be averaging these and finding that middle because we already have the middle. So if we want to do this algebraically, then the -7, 6 was actually the answer to those averages. And we are looking for point P, which I'm just going to call XY for now. So if we want to solve this algebraically, A is the middle point. A is the answer we got when we did midpoint in the problem above. So we're going to have to kind of go backwards and think of what we would do to find the midpoint and write an equation. So when we find the midpoint, we take the 2 endpoint values, we add and divide by 2. So it would be the x's of -2 and x divided by 2 would give us the x value of the midpoint, -7. And we write an equation. And to get the y value, we would say 4 plus the y value divided by 2 is equal to the y value of the midpoint. And then we can solve these equations for x and y. Probably the easiest way to think about the solving in this is to think of, put your number on the right over 1, creating a proportion, and then cross multiply. So 1 times -2 plus x would just be -2 plus x. Cross multiply the other way. 2 times -7, -14. And then we would solve by adding by 2 and get -12 for our x value. And then for the y value, cross multiplying again, we would get 4 plus y equals 12. Subtract the 4, and y is 8. So that gives us our x and our y for our point P. So this is algebraically how you would do this. Now, if you want another method, the method that I prefer, I like to call it strategically lazy because I use strategy to make it as easy as possible. If we were looking at this answer and looking at the graph grid that I provided, the graph grid I provided does not go all the way to -12 and 8. So you could potentially graph and use the slope and make sure that A is in the middle and kind of connect the dots there, but it's not going to work out for this question. So my favorite method is to do a pattern, to kind of use a number line, even though I know that doesn't really work for the fact that these are coordinate points, but I draw a little line segment and we want A to be the middle. So A is in the middle at -7, 6. So you've got to make sure the midpoint is in the middle. And sometimes they try to mess with you by listing the midpoint first. They'll be like, A is the midpoint of ZP, and then you looked at A and it was first in the sentence and you're setting it up, and you have to be very careful with which one is the middle, put that in the middle. Then the endpoints are Z and P, so we've got Z and P. And it doesn't matter if Z is on the left or P is on the left. And what I like to do is to use patterns to go from one letter to another. So look at the X values and see how they changed. It went from -2 to -7. It went down 5. If you struggle to figure out how it changed, take your new one minus your old one. So we've got -7 minus a -2. Minus minus is adding. This is going to be -7 plus 2, which is -5. It went down 5. So it went down 5. So what we have to do is to recreate that with the x's to get to point P, because it has to be the same horizontal distance apart to be surrounding point A. So -7 minus 5 is -12. Next, let's look at the y values. So the y value, it was 4 and it went to 6. It went up 2 because 6 minus 4 is a +2. Up 2 is the change. So you take the 6 and you go up 2 again, and you get 8. And then that's the answer. So I love this method because it's super, quick. I didn't have to do any algebra solving. All I had to do was, look at the change and do that again. But it's forgettable. So be careful. Practice it if you're going to use it. Practice it several times. And be very, very sure that you put the midpoint in the middle. Because if A was not in the middle, this pattern method would give you the wrong point. So be super careful with that. I'm going to make the next question in a separate video just to help out, like if you're having questions on certain topics, that way you can go straight to that topic's video.